Good evening. Cabinet met this afternoon to assess the rapidly evolving situation relating to Covid-19 and made further decisions to protect New Zealanders from the virus. While there remains no evidence of community outbreak in New Zealand to date, there continues to be significant outbreaks in other countries, and that poses a very serious risk to the rest of the world, including to New Zealand. All of the cases of Covid-19 identified in New Zealand to date relate to people travelling here and bringing the virus with them. While the majority have been returning New Zealanders, that has not always been the case. Therefore, we need to continue to make further decisions and further restrictions to limit the risk of people bringing the virus into New Zealand. From 11:59 p.m. tonight, we will close our border to any non-residents and citizens attempting to travel here. This will stop tourists or temporary visa holders, including students or temporary workers, from coming to and entering into New Zealand. New Zealand citizens and permanent residents will be able to return, and of course that includes the children and partners of citizens and permanent residents. These changes will also apply to the Pacific. They had previously been exempted. With the first case of Covid-19 in the Pacific now recorded, it's clear we need to take even stronger measures to protect our Pacific family too. A small number of exemptions will remain for the Pacific, particularly around those who may need to travel here for humanitarian reasons. There will also be exemptions for key workers in the health sector. Protecting New Zealanders from Covid-19 is our number one priority. To do that, we need to slow it down. Self-isolation is key to our success. All of the evidence to date is that returning New Zealanders understand the requirement for self-isolation, and the spot checks have demonstrated that. But I've been increasingly concerned that visitors to New Zealand have not necessarily adequately self-isolated for 14 days or are choosing not to, and that is an unacceptable risk that we must end. With each day, there are new developments in the global situation. New Zealand has sought to stay ahead of the curve and make decisions prior to other countries, and we do so again. The government understands that this decision will have further impacts on our economy. But by focusing on people's health, we also help our economy. A country in lockdown, devastated by Covid-19, hurts our people, and it also hurts our jobs. But we can continue to support businesses to weather the storm created by the virus. That is why we have put in place New Zealand's most significant peacetime economic response package and will support Kiwi jobs and the domestic economy from Covid-19. I want to acknowledge that in no time in New Zealand's history has a power like this been used, and I recognise how extraordinary it is. But we have to make decisions in the best interest of the health of those who live here, whether they be young or old, whether they are newly arrived or permanent. If we slow down Covid-19, if we break it into small waves of cases rather than the overwhelming number experienced in other countries, that is how we help our jobs and economy too. One final point I wish to make. This applies to people, not products. Those who continue to staff flights that are transporting freight or who continue to navigate the sea freight that comes into New Zealand will still be able to travel here. Our shelves will be stocked. There is no reason to panic buy. Have a plan and prepare. But do so knowing that our supermarkets will continue to have food on their shelves if you give them the time to restock them. I am now happy to take questions.
How long will this last for?
We'll continue to review these border restrictions along the same timetable that we set when we announced them on Saturday, and that was on a 16-day rotation.
Was this decision made in consultation with the Australian government? Because Scott Morrison has announced the same restrictions in just the past 30 minutes.
I notified PM Morrison as soon after exiting the Cabinet meeting. We made the decision between 4 and 5 o'clock today, and I notified him as we exited Cabinet.
Were you aware of his decision?
No, I was not.
What about tourists who are already in the country? What will this mean for them?
Essentially, those who have travelled here, I continue to reinforce with them they must self-isolate. And of course, we continue to have those spot checks. We continue to check that they are following our expectations. For those who have been here for longer than that, I would just advise them to check on their ability to leave New Zealand. As you can imagine, flights are starting to reduce. The ability to travel in and out of New Zealand is reducing, so I encourage them to check that they have their chance and ability to leave New Zealand as they plan to.
You've made strong comments about people coming into the country and not obeying those self-isolation rules. How much of this is about what's happening globally and how much is about the fact that people have just not been doing what has been asked of them?
We have continually stayed ahead of the evidence of what we're seeing abroad. I can think of no country who has had 28 cases as New Zealand has now and has made such an extraordinary move to close its borders. Our success so far has been in moving ahead of where we may anticipate being, acting early, acting decisively, and we continue to do so. So that has been a primary consideration. But I too have seen concerning reports of people flouting our expectations. As I said from the beginning, we are a country that likes to welcome visitors, that likes to welcome tourists, but we expect them to follow the rules that we've set. We did deport, we have had deportation notices, but I'm not willing to take risks here, and that is why we're taking a further measure.
You said you chatted to PM Morrison before you made this announcement. Which other world leaders were notified before you told us tonight?
Only PM Morrison. As I said, this decision was made between 4 and 5 o'clock this evening, and then I've come down and informed the New Zealand public. I've notified PM Morrison, and I leave the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade will be notifying others.
Why just Morrison? Why not the likes of Donald Trump or Boris Johnson or other?
PM Morrison, as you'd expect, of course, we have arrangements that affect both our citizens more closely because of our ability to move, and so he is one that I always stay in very close contact with.
There's a few planes that are already in the air which aren't due to land till early tomorrow morning. What happens to the passengers on those?
This applies to those who are boarding by that time this evening. So if you have already boarded and you're already en route, then you will still be able to land. You will be greeted by officials at the border. I've had a minister on the ground at the border this morning. I'd heard reports I was not satisfied with around the way the border was operating. We have beefed up that operation considerably. Everyone continues to receive a requirement to give us complete information about where they will be self-isolating. They will be checked in on by Healthline, and some may get a visit for a spot check, as some already have by the New Zealand Police.
What was
it that you weren't satisfied about from the report back from the Minister? Was it that people weren't being notified properly?
I wanted more intensive questioning at the border. I wanted conversations to be happening so that people fully understood their expectations. Now, of course, that will be happening only with returning New Zealand citizens and residents because I have simply removed the risk. I'm not willing to tolerate risk at our border. That is where predominantly our cases are coming from. Whilst we will continue to have cases in New Zealand as we continue to test New Zealanders with symptoms who have come home, we must slow down the transmission in New Zealand.
Why didn't you do this on Saturday?
You'll remember on Saturday we were, other than Israel, the only country in the world to have made that move. And we continue to make moves with a much smaller number of cases than any other country. Countries around the world right now who are putting in place border restrictions have massive outbreaks. We are making these moves with 28 cases. We continue to move ahead of what is happening with our borders, acting early, acting decisively.
How confident you have the balance right between acting early and not taking measures that are going to affect the economy disproportionately?
And this is continually the issue that we need to balance. But the decision Cabinet has made is that a country devastated by COVID-19 is an economy devastated by COVID-19. If we manage to slow down the transmission of this virus in New Zealand, that is how we best protect jobs and the economy.
Because of this tight deadline tonight, are you going to, is it inevitable basically that there will need to be mercy flights in order to get people home who are still overseas, who will not be on planes in time?
Keeping in mind there will continue, of course, to be returning New Zealanders. There are some who may be midway through their travels and recognise that flights around the world are diminishing, and so they're seeking to return home. So the likes of Air New Zealand continue to bring New Zealand citizens back, and so some of those flights will be available. I believe Qantas and Jetstar have given an indication that theirs will end near the end of March. So there are flights, but they are diminishing.
But because of those, because